Sarah Martinez stared at the red F scrawled across her physics exam, her hands trembling as she folded the paper in half. The harsh fluorescent lights of Jefferson High School's classroom seemed to mock her as other students filed past, chattering about their weekend plans. This was her third failed test in 2 weeks, and the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. She stuffed the crumpled exam into her backpack and hurried toward the exit, hoping to avoid the pitying looks from her classmates. Mathematics had been a disaster the day before, with a 47% that felt like a punch to the gut. History wasn't much better, despite her genuine interest in the subject. Every time she sat down to take a test, her mind seemed to freeze, words blurring together on the page like they were written in a foreign language. The walk home through her neighborhood in East Los Angeles felt longer than usual. Sarah passed the familiar sights that had shaped her childhood: the corner market where she bought penny candy, the basketball court where her older brother Miguel had taught her to shoot hoops, and the small house with peeling paint where her grandmother still lived. These streets held memories of simpler times when failing a spelling test in elementary school was the worst thing that could happen. At home, her mother Elena was waiting at the kitchen table, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her shift as a nursing assistant. The disappointed expression on her face told Sarah everything she needed to know before a single word was spoken. "Mrs. Patterson called," Elena said quietly, her accent thick with exhaustion. "She said you're failing 3 classes now." Sarah slumped into the chair across from her mother, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm trying, Mom, I really am." "Trying isn't enough anymore, mija," Elena replied, her voice soft but firm. "Your grades, they're getting worse every month. What happened to the smart girl who used to help me with my English homework?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah remembered those evenings clearly, sitting at this same table, helping her mother practice pronunciation for her citizenship test. Back then, learning felt natural, almost effortless. Now even the simplest concepts seemed to slip through her fingers like sand. Elena reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "You know I came to this country with nothing but hope for you and Miguel. I work double shifts so you can have opportunities I never had. But you have to meet me halfway." Sarah felt tears threatening to spill. Her mother's sacrifices weren't lost on her. Elena had immigrated from Mexico when Sarah was just 5 years old, determined to give her children a better life. She worked grueling hours at the hospital, came home exhausted, and still found energy to help with homework and attend school events. The guilt of letting her down felt heavier than any failed test. "I don't know what's wrong with me," Sarah whispered. "When I sit down to study, everything makes sense. But when test time comes, it's like my brain shuts down completely." Miguel walked through the front door just as Sarah wiped her eyes. At 19, he had inherited their father's tall frame and their mother's determination. He'd graduated high school the previous year and was working at a local auto shop while taking community college classes at night. Sarah had always looked up to him, but lately, the comparison felt like salt in an open wound. "What's going on?" Miguel asked, sensing the tension immediately. Elena filled him in while Sarah stared at the table. She could feel her brother's concerned gaze, but couldn't bring herself to look up. Miguel had never struggled in school the way she did. He wasn't the most naturally gifted student, but he was consistent, reliable. Everything Sarah felt she wasn't. "Look at me, Sarah," Miguel said, using her childhood nickname. When she finally raised her head, his expression was gentle but serious. "Remember when I was learning to fix engines? The first 100 times I tried to change spark plugs, I stripped the threads or cross-threaded them. My boss got so frustrated he almost fired me." Sarah nodded, remembering Miguel coming home covered in grease and frustration during his first months at the shop. "But you know what the difference was between failing and succeeding?" Miguel continued. "I stopped thinking of each mistake as proof I wasn't cut out for the work. I started thinking of them as information. Each screwed-up spark plug taught me something new about pressure, angle, or timing." "School isn't like fixing cars," Sarah protested. "Maybe not," Miguel agreed, "but your brain is like any other tool. If it's not working the way you expect, maybe you need to learn how to use it differently." Elena squeezed Sarah's hand. Tomorrow is Saturday. No school, no pressure. Why don't you spend some time thinking about what Miguel said? And maybe we can figure out a new plan. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling of the small bedroom she shared with her cousin Rosa, who was visiting from Guadalajara for the summer. Rosa was already asleep, her gentle snoring a familiar comfort in the darkness. Through the thin walls, Sarah could hear her mother moving around the kitchen, preparing for another early morning shift. She thought about Miguel's words, turning them over in her mind like stones in her pocket. Was there really a different way to approach learning? Her teachers had always emphasized memorization and repetition, but maybe those methods just didn't work for her brain. She'd heard other students talk about different learning styles, but had never seriously considered that she might need a completely different approach. The failures were piling up like debris after a storm, each one making the next seem more inevitable. But somewhere in Miguel's automotive metaphor, Sarah found a small spark of hope. If he could learn to fix engines through trial and error, maybe she could learn to fix whatever was broken in her approach to school. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. Monday would bring another chance, another test, another opportunity to either crumble under pressure or find a new way forward. The red Fs weren't going to define her forever, even if she couldn't yet imagine what success might look like. The foundation for change was being laid, one sleepless night and one conversation at a time. Monday arrived with the weight of unfinished homework and mounting anxiety. Sarah sat in her first period English class, Mrs. Chen's voice fading into background noise as she explained the symbolism in The Great Gatsby. The words on the page seemed to dance and shift, refusing to hold still long enough for Sarah to process their meaning. She found herself reading the same paragraph 3 times, each attempt yielding less comprehension than the last. Miss Martinez, would you like to share your thoughts on Gatsby's green light? Sarah's head snapped up, heat flooding her cheeks as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. She had no idea what Mrs. Chen was talking about. The green light could have been a traffic signal for all she knew at that moment. I think it represents hope, she stammered, grasping at the most generic interpretation she could remember from last year's literature class. Mrs. Chen's expression softened with barely concealed pity. That's a start, Sarah. Perhaps you could stay after class to discuss the reading assignment. The rest of the period crawled by in a haze of embarrassment. Sarah's classmates had stopped looking at her with surprise when she struggled to answer questions. Their expressions had shifted to something worse. Expectation of failure. She had become the girl who didn't know the answers, the one teachers called on only when they wanted to demonstrate a point about preparation or effort. After class, Mrs. Chen's concern felt like acid on an open wound. Sarah, I've noticed you seem distracted lately. Is everything all right at home? The question was well-intentioned, but Sarah couldn't find words to explain that everything was falling apart inside her head. How could she describe the way letters seemed to rearrange themselves when she was nervous? How could she admit that she'd read the same chapter of Gatsby 4 times and still couldn't remember what happened? I'm fine, Mrs. Chen, just tired. The lie felt heavy on her tongue, but it was easier than the truth. Mrs. Chen didn't push, but her expression suggested she didn't believe the excuse either. Chemistry second period was a disaster waiting to happen. Mr. Rodriguez had announced a pop quiz on molecular structures, and Sarah felt her familiar panic setting in before he even handed out the papers. Her hands started sweating immediately, making it difficult to grip her pencil properly. The first question asked her to identify the chemical formula for water. She knew this. H2O. Everyone knew this. But as she stared at the paper, doubt crept in. Was it H2O or HO2? The numbers began to blur together, and suddenly she wasn't sure of anything. By the time she reached the third question, her mind had gone completely blank. She could hear other students' pencils moving confidently across their papers while hers remained frozen in her grip. The tick of the classroom clock seemed to grow louder with each passing second, marking time she didn't have and answers she couldn't access. Time's up. Pass your papers forward. Sarah handed in a nearly blank sheet, knowing Mr. Rodriguez would see just another confirmation of her declining academic performance. She had become a case study in failure, a cautionary tale other parents probably use to motivate their own children. Lunchtime provided no relief. Sarah found herself sitting alone at the far end of a cafeteria table, picking at a sandwich her mother had packed with love and hope. Her former study group had stopped inviting her to join them after too many sessions, where she couldn't contribute anything meaningful to their discussions. She watched her classmates laughing and sharing notes from their morning classes. Amanda Wilson was explaining a math concept to Jake Peterson, her voice confident and clear. Sarah remembered when math had made sense to her, back in middle school when numbers followed logical rules and equations balanced like perfectly choreographed dances. "Hey, Sarah, mind if I sit here?" She looked up to see David Kim, a quiet boy from her history class. He wasn't part of the popular crowd, but he was kind and had never made her feel stupid for not understanding something. "Sure," she said, grateful for any company that didn't pity her. David unwrapped his lunch and sat down across from her. "Rough morning?" Sarah almost laughed at the understatement. "You could say that. Failed another chemistry quiz. I'm pretty sure Mr. Rodriguez thinks I'm hopeless." "My sister went through something similar," David said thoughtfully. "She was really smart, but tests just destroyed her confidence. Turns out she had test anxiety so bad it was like her brain would shut down completely." The words hit Sarah like recognition. Test anxiety. She'd heard the term before but had always dismissed it as an excuse for poor preparation. But David's description matched her experience perfectly. The sweating palms, the mental fog, the way familiar concepts became foreign under pressure. "What did she do about it?" Sarah asked. "She got help, talked to the school counselor, learned some techniques for managing stress. It didn't happen overnight, but she got better." For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a small flicker of something that might have been hope. Maybe there was a name for what she was experiencing. Maybe it wasn't just stupidity or laziness. The afternoon brought more challenges. Spanish class, which should have been easier given her family's background, became another exercise in humiliation when she couldn't conjugate verbs she'd known since childhood. Her teacher, Señora Valdez, looked particularly disappointed since she'd had such high expectations for Sarah based on her cultural background. "En mi familia, hablamos español todos los días," Sarah had explained on the first day of class, proud to share her linguistic heritage. Now, weeks later, she could barely string together a coherent sentence under the pressure of class participation grades. Walking home after school, Sarah's backpack felt heavier than usual, weighted down. With failed assignments and mounting homework she wasn't sure she could complete. The familiar streets of her neighborhood looked different somehow, like she was seeing them through a fog of failure that colored everything gray. She passed the community center where she'd attended after-school programs as a child. A small sign by the entrance advertised tutoring services and academic support groups. For a moment she considered stopping to ask for information, but shame held her back. What if the tutors recognized her as the girl who couldn't even pass basic high school classes? At home, Miguel was in the driveway working on his car, grease-stained hands moving with practiced precision as he adjusted something under the hood. The sight of his competence in his chosen field made Sarah's academic struggles feel even more pronounced. "How was school, Sarah?" he called out, not looking up from his work. "Fine," she lied, the same response she'd been giving for months. Miguel wiped his hands on a rag and studied her face. Her brother had always been good at reading her moods, even when she tried to hide them. "That bad, huh?" Sarah felt her carefully constructed facade crumble. "I can't do this anymore, Miguel. I'm failing everything. The teachers look at me like I'm broken, and maybe I am." Miguel closed the car hood and leaned against the fender, giving her his full attention. "You remember when we used to watch those military documentaries together when we were kids?" Sarah nodded, confused by the sudden change of topic. "You always said you wanted to serve your country someday. What happened to that dream?" "Dreams are for people who can actually accomplish things," Sarah said bitterly. "I can't even pass a high school chemistry test." Miguel's expression grew serious. "Those SEALs and soldiers we used to watch, you think they never failed at anything? You think they were born knowing how to navigate impossible situations? That's different. That's real-world stuff, not sitting in a classroom bubble filling answer sheets. Is it, though? Miguel asked. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're in the middle of your own impossible situation right now. Question is, are you going to figure out how to navigate it, or are you going to give up? The challenge in his voice sparked something in Sarah she hadn't felt in months. Anger. Not at him, but at the situation, at herself, at the way she'd been accepting defeat as inevitable. Maybe Miguel was right. Maybe this was her first real battle and she'd been approaching it all wrong. The Veterans Day Assembly at Jefferson High School was supposed to be routine, another mandatory gathering where students would half listen to speeches about patriotism while secretly checking their phones. Sarah shuffled into the gymnasium. With her classmates, her mind preoccupied with the algebra test she'd failed spectacularly that morning. The red ink corrections seemed burned into her retinas, another confirmation that she was fundamentally broken when it came to learning. Principal Morrison stepped up to the microphone, his voice echoing through the crowded space. Today we're honored to welcome Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, a decorated Navy SEAL who served 3 tours in Afghanistan. Sarah looked up from her lap for the first time since taking her seat. On stage stood a man who seemed to command attention without trying. He wasn't particularly tall or physically imposing, but something in his bearing suggested quiet strength. His uniform was immaculate, every crease sharp, every ribbon and insignia precisely placed. When he moved to the podium, his steps were measured and purposeful. Chief Thompson began to speak, and unlike most assembly speakers who seemed to drone on forever, his voice carried an authenticity that cut through the typical teenage disinterest. He talked about the meaning of service, about pushing through impossible circumstances, about the difference between failing and being defeated. Failure isn't the opposite of success, he said, his eyes scanning the audience. It's the raw material from which success is built. Every mission I've been on, every challenge I've faced, started with somebody telling me it couldn't be done, or that I wasn't good enough to do it. Sarah found herself leaning forward, caught despite herself by his words. This wasn't the usual rah-rah motivational speech she'd expected. Chief Thompson was talking about real failure, the kind that cut deep and left lasting scars. He described a mission in the mountains of Afghanistan where his team had been pinned down for 18 hours by enemy fire. Their extraction had failed, their communications were damaged, and they were running low on ammunition. By every tactical measure, they should have been defeated. We had 2 choices, Chief Thompson continued. Accept that we were beaten, or find a different way to define victory. Sometimes the greatest success is simply refusing to quit when quitting would be easier. The words hit Sarah like physical impact. How many times had she accepted defeat because it felt easier than continuing to struggle? How many tests had she approached already convinced of failure? After his formal presentation, Chief Thompson moved to the back of the gymnasium where he'd set up a small display of military equipment and photos from his deployments. Most students filed out quickly, eager to return to their regular classes, but Sarah found herself walking toward his table. She stood at the edge of the small crowd that had gathered, listening as he answered questions about military life and combat operations. His responses were thoughtful and honest, neither glorifying war nor minimizing its challenges. When a sophomore asked about the hardest part of being a SEAL, Chief Thompson paused for a long moment. The hardest part isn't the physical training, or even the dangerous missions, he said finally. It's learning to trust your training when everything around you is chaos. It's believing in your ability to solve problems even when you can't see the solution yet. The crowd began to thin as students returned to class, but Sarah remained frozen in place. Chief Thompson noticed her standing there and walked over, his expression kind but direct. You look like you have something on your mind, he said. Sarah felt heat rush to her cheeks. She hadn't intended to draw his attention, but something in his manner made her feel like she could speak honestly. I was wondering, she began hesitantly, what do you do when you keep failing at something that should be easy? When everyone around you can do things that seem impossible for you? Chief Thompson studied her face for a moment, and Sarah had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her careful facades. Tell me about these failures, he said simply. To her surprise, the whole story came pouring out. The failed tests, the mounting anxiety, the way her mind seemed to shut down under pressure. She told him about her mother's sacrifices and her own crushing sense that she was letting everyone down. She explained how school had become a battlefield where she lost every single engagement. Chief Thompson listened without interrupting, his attention completely focused on her words. When she finished, he was quiet for several seconds, processing what she'd shared. "You know what I hear when you talk about your test anxiety?" he asked finally. Sarah shook her head, bracing herself for another well-meaning suggestion about studying harder or managing her time better. "I hear someone describing combat stress. The sweating palms, the mental fog, the feeling like your training abandons you right when you need it most. That's exactly what happens to soldiers in their first firefight." The comparison startled her. She'd never thought of her classroom struggles in those terms, but the parallel was undeniable. "So what do soldiers do about it?" she asked. "They acknowledge that it's real, first of all. Combat stress isn't weakness or lack of preparation. It's a normal human response to high-stakes situations. Once you accept that, you can start developing countermeasures." Chief Thompson pulled a small notebook from his pocket and wrote down a few lines, then tore out the page and handed it to her. "Tactical breathing," he explained. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. We use this in the field when we need to stay calm under pressure. The second thing is what we call mission rehearsal. You visualize yourself succeeding before you even enter the situation. Sarah looked at the simple diagram he'd drawn, just arrows and numbers showing the breathing pattern, but it felt like he'd handed her a secret weapon. "The third thing," Chief Thompson continued, "and this might be the most important, you need to change your relationship with failure. Right now, you're treating every failed test like proof that you're not cut out for academic success. But what if each failure was actually intelligence gathering? What if it was data you could use to refine your approach?" "I never thought of it that way," Sarah admitted. "In the teams, we have a saying, adapt, overcome, and learn. Every mission teaches us something, whether it goes perfectly or falls apart completely. The ones that fall apart sometimes teach us more." Chief Thompson glanced at his watch, and Sarah realized she was probably keeping him from his next appointment. "I should let you go," she said. "Thank you for listening. And for the breathing technique." "Wait a second," he said, reaching into his display case. He pulled out a small military coin about the size of a quarter, with the Navy SEAL trident embossed on one side. "This is a challenge coin," he explained, placing it in her palm. "Every SEAL gets one when they graduate from training. It reminds us that we've already proven we can do impossible things." Sarah stared at the coin, feeling its weight in her hand. "I didn't graduate from SEAL training," she pointed out. Chief Thompson smiled, and for the first time since their conversation began, she saw a hint of humor in his expression. "No, but you're about to graduate from something harder, learning how to turn failure into fuel for success. That takes a different kind of courage, but it's just as real." He looked directly into her eyes, and she felt the full force of his conviction. "I see something in you," he said quietly. "You're not broken and you're not stupid. You're just fighting the wrong battle with the wrong weapons. Time to change tactics." Chief Thompson gave her a single, almost imperceptible nod, the kind of acknowledgement that passed between professionals who recognized each other's potential. In that moment, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest, a small flame of possibility that hadn't been there an hour earlier. As she walked back to class, the challenge coin warm in her pocket, Sarah realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't dreading her next test. She was planning for it. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of the challenge coin for the 100th time since Chief Thompson had given it to her 3 days earlier. She sat at her desk at home, staring at the algebra homework that had been defeating her for the past hour. The equations looked like foreign hieroglyphics, but instead of the familiar wave of panic, she felt something different, a quiet determination she hadn't experienced in months. She closed her eyes and began the tactical breathing exercise Chief Thompson had taught her. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. The technique felt awkward at first, like wearing someone else's clothes, but gradually her racing heartbeat began to slow. When she opened her eyes, the equations were still there, still challenging, but they no longer seemed like insurmountable obstacles. They were problems waiting to be solved, puzzles that required the right approach rather than impossible barriers designed to humiliate her. Sarah pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote, "Mission Briefing," at the top, borrowing language from Chief Thompson's military background. Instead of diving straight into the homework, she spent 5 minutes analyzing what she was actually trying to accomplish. The assignment covered linear equations, something she'd understood during class discussion but lost track of when faced with the pressure of completion. She broke down the task into smaller components, treating each equation like a separate objective, rather than one overwhelming mission. The first problem asked her to solve for x in the equation 3x plus 7 siren 22. Instead of freezing up, she talked herself through each step aloud, the way she might explain the process to someone else. Subtract 7 from both sides. That gives me 3x carry 15. Then divide both sides by 3, so x equals 5. The solution felt almost anticlimactic in its simplicity. Sarah checked her work twice, then moved on to the second problem with growing confidence. This systematic approach, breaking complex challenges into manageable pieces, was exactly what Chief Thompson had described when talking about military planning. By the time her mother came home from her evening shift at the hospital, Sarah had completed the entire assignment for the first time in weeks. More importantly, she actually understood what she'd done rather than just copying formulas blindly. "Mia, you look different tonight," Elena observed, settling into the kitchen chair across from her daughter. "More focused." Sarah showed her the completed homework, explaining the new study techniques she was experimenting with. Elena listened with growing amazement as her daughter demonstrated the breathing exercises and described her systematic approach to problem solving. "Where did you learn all this?" Elena asked. "There was a Navy SEAL who spoke at school. He helped me realize I was approaching everything wrong." Elena's eyebrows rose. The military had never been part of their family's conversation. Miguel had briefly considered enlisting after high school, but their mother had worried about the dangers and encouraged him toward civilian careers instead. "What did this soldier tell you?" Elena asked carefully. Sarah explained Chief Thompson's philosophy about failure being raw material for success, about combat stress and tactical responses. As she talked, she saw her mother's expression shift from concern to curiosity. "It sounds like he saw something in you that you couldn't see in yourself," Elena said thoughtfully. The next morning brought Sarah's first opportunity to test her new strategies in actual combat conditions, a pop quiz in chemistry class. As Mr. Rodriguez handed out the papers, Sarah felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in her stomach. But this time she was ready for it. She placed the challenge coin on her desk where she could see it, then spent 30 seconds doing tactical breathing, before even looking at the questions. The mental fog that usually descended during tests remained at bay, replaced by the kind of calm focus she'd never experienced in an academic setting. The first question asked her to balance a chemical equation. Instead of panicking about getting it wrong, Sarah approached it like a puzzle to be solved systematically. She worked through each step methodically, checking her logic before moving forward. When she encountered a question she couldn't answer immediately, instead of spiraling into despair, she marked it and moved on to questions she could handle. This was another technique Chief Thompson had mentioned: tactical flexibility, adapting to circumstances rather than rigidly following a predetermined plan. 20 minutes later, Sarah handed in her quiz with a sense of accomplishment she hadn't felt in months. She might not have aced every question, but she'd remained calm and strategic throughout the process. More importantly, she'd demonstrated to herself that her new approach could work under real pressure. David Kim caught up with her after class, his expression curious. "You seemed really focused during that quiz. Different from usual." "I'm trying some new study techniques," Sarah explained, then found herself sharing Chief Thompson's advice about treating academic challenges like military operations. David listened with growing interest. "That actually makes a lot of sense. My sister might want to hear about this approach too." Would you be willing to talk to her? The request surprised Sarah. For months, she'd been the one seeking help and advice from others. The idea that she might have something valuable to offer someone else felt both foreign and exciting. Sure, she agreed. Maybe we could start a study group. Use these techniques together. Word of Sarah's transformation began spreading through their small circle of academically struggling students. Jessica Ramirez, who battled math anxiety similar to Sarah's test stress, asked to learn the breathing techniques. Tommy Chen, David's younger brother, wanted to understand the systematic approach to breaking down complex problems. By Friday afternoon, 5 students had gathered in the school library to form what they jokingly called their academic SEAL team. Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of teaching others the strategies that Chief Thompson had shared with her. The key is changing how you think about the challenge, she explained to the group. Instead of seeing a failed test as proof you're stupid, treat it like intelligence gathering. What did the failure teach you about your preparation? What tactical adjustments do you need to make? Jessica practiced the tactical breathing while working through a trigonometry problem. Her usual stress response noticeably diminished. Tommy applied the systematic breakdown approach to a history essay, organizing his thoughts into clear, manageable components before beginning to write. As Sarah watched her classmates implement these techniques, she felt a sense of purpose she'd never experienced in traditional academic settings. She was contributing something valuable, helping others navigate challenges she understood intimately. The following Monday brought the results of Friday's chemistry quiz. Mr. Rodriguez handed back the papers with his usual stoic expression. But when he reached Sarah's desk, she detected something different in his manner. "Much improved, Miss Martinez," he said quietly, placing her paper face down on her desk. Sarah flipped it over to reveal a B+, the highest grade she'd received in any subject for over 2 months. More satisfying than the grade itself was the knowledge that she'd earned it through preparation and strategy rather than luck or chance. At lunch, the academic SEAL team gathered to share their week's successes and challenges. Jessica had passed her math test for the first time all semester. Tommy had received positive feedback on his history essay. Even David, who had been the most skeptical about military-inspired study techniques, admitted that the systematic approach had helped him organize his thoughts more effectively. "I think we should invite that Navy SEAL back to speak to more students," Jessica suggested. "These techniques could help a lot of people." Sarah felt a warm surge of gratitude toward Chief Thompson, whose brief encounter had sparked a transformation she was still trying to fully understand. His simple nod of recognition had conveyed more confidence in her abilities than months of well-meaning advice from teachers and counselors. That evening, as she worked through her homework with newfound efficiency and confidence, Sarah realized she'd discovered something more valuable than improved grades. She'd learned that her struggles weren't signs of inherent deficiency, but challenges that could be overcome with the right strategies and mindset. The girl who had been failing every test was becoming someone who approached each academic challenge as a mission to be planned, executed, and learned from. The transformation was just beginning. 3 months after Chief Thompson's visit, Sarah stared at the acceptance letter in disbelief. UCLA's letterhead seemed too official, too important to be addressed to someone who had been failing basic high school classes just a semester earlier. The words, "We are pleased to offer you admission to our engineering program," blurred as tears filled her eyes. Her transformation hadn't been instant or magical. Each day had required conscious effort to apply the military-inspired strategies that had begun reshaping her approach to learning. The academic SEAL team had evolved from 5 struggling students into a recognized study group that other classmates actively sought to join. Their success stories had spread throughout Jefferson High School, creating ripple effects none of them had anticipated. Sarah's grades had climbed steadily throughout the spring semester. The B+ on her chemistry quiz had been followed by an A on the next test, then a solid A on the midterm exam. Mr. Rodriguez, who had written her off as academically hopeless just months earlier, had become one of her strongest supporters, even writing a recommendation letter that emphasized her remarkable turnaround. "Your transformation has been the most dramatic I've witnessed in 20 years of teaching," he had told her when she asked for his recommendation. You've proven that intelligence isn't fixed. It's something that can be developed through persistence and proper strategy. The systematic approach Chief Thompson had introduced had become second nature to Sarah. She approached each subject like a military campaign, identifying objectives, assessing resources, and developing tactical plans for success. Her notebooks were filled with mission briefings, strategic analyses, and after-action reports that helped her continuously refine her methods. Mathematics, which had been her greatest enemy, became almost enjoyable when she stopped seeing equations as threats and started viewing them as puzzles requiring logical solutions. Her algebra teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had been so impressed with Sarah's progress that she'd asked her to tutor struggling underclassmen. "You have a gift for explaining complex concepts in simple terms," Mrs. Patterson had observed. "You understand what it feels like to be lost, so you know exactly how to guide others toward clarity." The tutoring sessions had revealed another dimension of Sarah's transformation. Teaching others forced her to deepen her own understanding while building confidence she'd never possessed. When Tommy Chen's sister struggled with the same test anxiety that had once paralyzed Sarah, she was able to share not just the breathing techniques, but the lived experience of overcoming academic fear. Sarah's family had watched her metamorphosis with amazement and pride. Elena worked fewer double shifts now, partly because Sarah's improved grades meant fewer emergency meetings with teachers and counselors, but mostly because her daughter's newfound confidence had lifted the entire household's spirits. Miguel had been her biggest cheerleader throughout the transformation. "I told you that you were stronger than you realized," he reminded her regularly. "You just needed to find the right battlefield tactics." The military metaphors that had initially felt awkward now seemed perfectly natural. Sarah understood that her academic struggles hadn't been character flaws but tactical challenges requiring strategic solutions. Every failed test had provided valuable intelligence about her learning patterns, stress responses, and knowledge gaps. Chief Thompson had visited the school twice more during the semester, partly to speak with other classes but mainly to check on Sarah's progress. His quiet confidence in her abilities had never wavered even when she doubted herself. 5 years later, Sarah stood at the podium in Jefferson High School's gymnasium, looking out at an audience that included many of the same teachers who had once watched her struggle through basic coursework. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on her. She was back where her transformation had begun, but now as the featured speaker for this year's Veterans Day Assembly. Her UCLA engineering degree hung framed in her apartment, but the real measure of her success sat in the audience before her. Dozens of students who had participated in academic combat training programs across 3 school districts had achieved dramatic improvements in their academic performance. The systematic approach that Chief Thompson had introduced during a single conversation had evolved into a comprehensive methodology now being studied by education researchers nationwide. Sarah adjusted the microphone and began with the same honesty that had characterized her journey from the beginning. "5 years ago, I was failing every test in this school. My teachers had given up on me. My classmates expected me to fail, and worst of all, I had started believing that maybe everyone was right about my limitations." She paused, seeing recognition in several students' faces. Academic struggle was a universal experience, but the shame and isolation that accompanied it made each person feel uniquely broken. Then a Navy SEAL visited this gymnasium and changed everything with a single conversation. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson didn't give me magic solutions or easy answers. He gave me something more valuable, a new way to think about failure. Sarah's presentation had evolved considerably since her first nervous attempt at the educators' conference. She now spoke with the confidence of someone who had not only transformed herself, but had helped hundreds of others do the same. Her consulting firm, Tactical Learning Solutions, worked with schools across the country to implement systematic approaches to academic improvement. Chief Thompson taught me that failure isn't the opposite of success, it's raw material. Every failed test, every moment of confusion, every time I felt completely overwhelmed was actually data I could use to get better. In the audience, she spotted Elena and Miguel, their faces glowing with pride. Her mother had recently completed her nursing degree, inspired partly by watching Sarah's academic transformation. Miguel had started his own automotive repair business, applying many of the systematic problem-solving approaches his sister had shared with him. Near the back of the gymnasium, Sarah noticed a familiar figure in military uniform. Chief Thompson had returned to witness the full circle moment, his presence a reminder of where this journey had begun. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her the same slight nod that had started everything years earlier. The techniques I learned that day, tactical breathing, systematic problem breakdown, mission planning for academic challenges, these aren't just study tips. They're life skills that apply to any situation where you need to perform under pressure. Sarah clicked to her first slide, showing before and after academic records from students in her programs. The data was impressive, but the real stories were more compelling than any statistics. Maria Santos was failing algebra when she started, using tactical breathing techniques to manage test anxiety. She graduated as valedictorian and is now studying biomedical engineering at Stanford. Another slide showed Tommy Chen, who had evolved from a struggling freshman in her original study group to a confident senior headed to MIT for computer science. The academic SEAL team we started in this library has graduated 127 students who went on to 4-year colleges. 63 of them are pursuing STEM degrees. These weren't students who were naturally gifted at academics. They were students who learned to approach learning strategically. Sarah's presentation included practical demonstrations of the core techniques. She led the entire gymnasium through a tactical breathing exercise, explaining how controlled respiration could manage stress responses during high-pressure situations. The sight of 400 teenagers simultaneously practicing military breathing techniques would have seemed absurd years earlier, but now felt like a natural extension of everything she'd learned. The most important lesson isn't about studying harder or being naturally smart, Sarah continued. It's about changing your relationship with challenge itself. When you stop seeing obstacles as proof of your limitations and start seeing them as problems to be solved systematically, everything changes. She shared her own college experience, which had been challenging but manageable once she applied the strategic thinking that had become second nature. Engineering school had tested her resilience and adaptability, but never in ways that felt insurmountable. The girl who had once panicked over basic algebra had graduated with a degree in aerospace engineering. I'm now working on satellite communication systems that help military units coordinate in remote locations. In a way, I'm still serving alongside people like Chief Thompson, just from a different battlefield. The military metaphors that had once felt borrowed now felt authentically hers. Sarah had discovered that her academic struggles had actually prepared her for the complex problem-solving required in engineering. Her experience with failure had taught her persistence and creative thinking that many naturally gifted students never developed. During the question and answer session, a freshman girl raised her hand hesitantly. What if you try all these techniques and you still fail? What if you're just not smart enough for school? Sarah smiled, recognizing the question she had once asked Chief Thompson in this very gymnasium. That's exactly what I asked Chief Thompson when I was sitting in your seat 5 years ago. Want to know what he told me? The auditorium fell completely silent, every student leaning forward to hear the answer. He said that intelligence isn't fixed. It's not something you either have or don't have. It's something you develop through strategic practice and learning from mistakes. The students who struggle the most often become the strongest problem solvers because they've had to develop resilience and creativity. After the assembly, Sarah met privately with a small group of students who reminded her of her former self. Their stories were different in detail but identical in theme. Bright kids who had started believing they weren't cut out for academic success. She spent 2 hours with them, not just teaching techniques but sharing the emotional journey of transformation. The practical strategies were important, but the deeper lesson was about identity. These students needed to understand that their current struggles didn't define their future potential. I want you to remember something, Sarah told the group as they prepared to leave. A year from now, you could be sitting in this same room helping other students the way I'm helping you. Your failures aren't evidence that you can't succeed. They're preparation for the success that's coming. As the students filed out, Chief Thompson approached the front of the room. His uniform still looked impossibly crisp, his bearing still Commanded respect, but his smile was warmer than Sarah remembered. "Outstanding presentation, Engineer Martinez," he said, using her new professional title with obvious pride. "I owe it all to a conversation that started right here," Sarah replied. "That nod you gave me changed everything." Chief Thompson shook his head gently. "I didn't change anything. I just recognized what was already there. The courage, the intelligence, the determination. You had all of that before we ever met. You just needed someone to help you see it." They talked for another hour about the students Sarah was now working with and the program she was developing. Chief Thompson shared stories from his continued military service, including missions where he'd applied some of the educational strategies Sarah had refined. "You know what the most rewarding part of this has been?" Sarah asked as their conversation wound down. "What's that?" "Realizing that my struggles weren't obstacles to overcome, they were qualifications for the work I'm doing now. I can help these students because I know exactly what it feels like to believe you're not smart enough. Every failure I experienced prepared me to guide others through similar challenges." Chief Thompson nodded approvingly. "That's what we call turning a liability into an asset. Classic SEAL thinking." As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the circular nature of her journey. The gymnasium, where she had once felt humiliated by her academic failures, had become the place where she inspired others to transform their own struggles into strength. Her phone buzzed with text messages from students who had attended the assembly, already asking about joining study groups and learning more about tactical learning approaches. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to help others discover their hidden potential. Sarah smiled, thinking about the challenge coin she still carried in her wallet. She rarely needed to touch it anymore for confidence, but it remained a reminder of a single moment when someone saw possibilities she couldn't recognize in herself. The girl who had failed every test had become a woman who helped others turn their failures into fuel for extraordinary success. The transformation was complete, but the mission continued.